Okay, so what am I going to talk about this morning? Well, I'm going to give you an overview of what's happening on the Postgres project. I'm going to talk about Postgres 12, and I'm going to talk about some other areas as well. So I've got an hour to talk to you. I won't be talking to you about XML or time zones. Okay, so hopefully that's a good thing. So let's start with where Postgres is these days. Postgres is one of the fastest growing databases anywhere in the world, and as a result we've been awarded the DB Engine's top spot, the number one database. Now you're probably thinking, well, how many databases are there? How come we're number one? Well, at last count there's somewhere between 300 and 400 different software database systems available in the world, and we are the fastest growing. Okay, so that's taken some effort on a lot of people's part to get us to that point. So it's been a long haul over many years. As I said, some of us in this room have been working on Postgres for 20 years. That is not an isolated number. We've got a lot of recognition from a lot of places. So Postgres is big, it's important, and you should make sure to tell people that that is the truth, okay? Because what tends to happen is the people that know about Postgres are completely happy with it, and they just don't say anything to anybody, okay? So there's lots of people talking about SQL Server and MySQL and Oracle. Go out there and tell people that you use Postgres and how good it is, okay? That's quite important. So the statistics on the project are that the project is very healthy. We maintain one new release each year, and that now happens on a very strict cycle. So it's a very tightly controlled development process, which means that a lot of good features are getting into Postgres each year. As you can see, there's roughly 200 features in each release of Postgres. But those 200 features actually are made up of something like 2,000 different commits. So a new feature isn't just one thing, it's all of the bug fixes, all of the documentation, all of the tweaks that we have to do to make the tests work, and that kind of thing. The number of committers on the project has now gone up. We peaked at 27 people. So the committers are the people that are responsible for committing features, but also fixing the bugs that they have in those features. Obviously, a very important responsibility. What you can see is that the number of files that we manage within the project is going up and up and up. And that means that the code is getting more and more complex. So the fact that we're adding committers is really more about the fact that the software is now so complex that one person can't manage all of the project as maybe used to happen in the past. Which is a good thing because it means we've got lots of people that know how the code works. So it's a robust and stable open source project. So let's look at some really cool things that are happening in Postgres 12. First of all, Postgres is now available in color, which I kind of think that's like 50 years too late, right? So I had color TV when I was a kid, though I do remember black and white TV, but it's a little late for these things, but Postgres is a database, right? So it doesn't really have a color most of the time. But we do have images in the docs, and we've got coloration as well. But if you really want some color, then you should be using OmniDB, okay? It's written by guys in Brazil, and it's been designed from the ground up to be very fast and responsive, and it's pretty full-featured, okay? I think one of the things that we did with OmniDB was make sure that the DDL handling was we didn't draw a little dialog box for every single different DDL statement, because then that's hundreds and hundreds of man hours wasted just drawing little boxes, okay? So that bit isn't in OmniDB. So if you can't type alter table, then you're probably not going to get on with OmniDB, okay? But it does all of the things you want and doesn't waste time on the things you don't want. So, produced in Brazil, very good piece of work. And this is my attempt to speak Portuguese. I really don't have any words of Portuguese apart from bom dia, but I won't sort of hit you with that. So let me talk about what are the big features in Postgres 12. So just to remind you, Postgres 12 is the release that's coming out in a few months' time. So September, October. So we're about 2 months away from Postgres 12. So we're just about to go into beta 3, and this is the thing that you'll be using in the future. That's why I'm telling you about it. So the file recovery.conf is now gone, which many people have been wanting for some time. I have to say, a hint of sadness from me, because I invented recovery.conf 15 years ago, and it's been kind of well loved for the first 5 years and then slightly less loved over the intervening time, to the point where people are thinking it was a great design to start with, but now let's replace it with something else. So recovery.conf is gone. Why is it gone? Because we want to replace that with the ability to change the parameters in the recovery.conf in the same way that we change the parameters in the PostgreSQL.conf. Okay, so it makes a lot of sense to change that so that we can improve the user interface. We haven't made all of the parameters changeable just yet, but we will do. Strange thing, we've got a feature that only works for people in the UK and Portugal, unfortunately not in Brazil. It's a little bit strange, this. They've altered alter table so that if you use UTC as your time zone, then it will be optimized. If you use any other time zone, you're out of luck. Okay, so this is clear favoritism for people that live in Iceland, I think. Anyway, more importantly, we have re-index concurrently, which has taken about 10 years too long to arrive in the project, but it is now here. And Alvaro's also done some work on further DDL progress reporting, and he's got a talk on that later in the conference as well. We've also made advances on a table access method, and I'll be talking about more about that later in the talk. But there are many performance tweaks, and partitioning has been greatly improved. So what exactly has improved in partitioning? Well, partitioning was introduced in Postgres 10. We made some feature improvements in Postgres 11, for example, the ability to add primary keys. But in Postgres 12, we've concentrated on performance improvements, and you can see the list of them there. The major thing that we've tried to do is reduce the dependency on the number of partitions, because no point having partitioning if you're only allowed to have 100 partitions. Now, I have met some crazy people that wanted to have one partition per minute in their database, and unfortunately we haven't optimized it for hundreds of thousands of partitions yet, but what we have done is optimize it for hundreds to thousands of partitions. Now, the two graphs I'm showing you are an independent assessment of the performance of Postgres 12 against Postgres 11 and also against timescale DB. And these figures and graphs are taken from the timescale DB GitHub site. So I've had nothing to do with these figures apart from copying them from that location. Now, if you look at the figures, you'll see that blue is, do I have a little pointer? Wow, look at that. So blue here is Postgres 11, orange is Timescale DB, and green is Postgres 12. So you'll see that Postgres 12 is 4 times faster than Timescale DB, and it's also pretty linear in the sense that it doesn't matter how many partitions you use, the performance stays roughly the same. And I say roughly the same because there are some dependencies in there. You can see that we've made it work for selects that have a static, constant timestamp. We've also made it work for inserts, updates, and deletes, but there are some things that still don't work right, even in Postgres 12. So we will be optimizing those in Postgres 13. But hopefully you can see that the actions that we've taken have greatly increased performance and made it linear in terms of the number of partitions. So as of Postgres 12, I'm now telling you that the feature set of partitioning in Postgres is ready to be fully used in the real world with very large databases. Now, if you think back a couple of years, a company called Adyen spoke at Postgres Europe, and they said that they were running a Postgres database that at the time was 59 terabytes in size. And I know now that it's 75 terabytes in size without partitioning. Okay? So now we have a database where we've got performance numbers that show that it can go to 1,000 partitions. Okay? So I think it's reasonable to claim that as of Postgres 12, we're able to juggle around a petabyte of data quite comfortably within Postgres itself. Obviously, there's various optimizations that are still needed to make that fully true, but my point is that you're now in a much better position to manage very large databases. And a few bugs. Well, just to show that people are trying to use partitioning, we fixed 27 bugs over the course of the last year as well. Many of them have been fixed and committed by Alvaro himself. So that shows again that the software is ready for use with partitioning. There's another thing that happened over the last year, which is called fsync gate, by which I mean to say that there was a big scandal in the Linux community about the way that fsync works on Linux. And this had some effect on the Postgres project. So Second Quadrant's Craig Ringer, a technical consultant, was brave enough to put his hand in the air and say, I think Linux looks broken to me. And everybody just laughed and said, gosh, aren't you stupid? How could that possibly be the case? And then it later came out that Linux doesn't report file system errors in the way that everybody thought. And of course, it's not a bug. We're not allowed to claim it's a bug. It's a feature. It's a feature of Linux that it tells you it's got a bug, and if you didn't hear the first time, well, then that's your fault. Okay. So Postgres has got no real way of dealing with that. So if you do get file system errors come back in certain cases, then we are forced to shut down the database, because that's the only way we can be absolutely certain that we have responded sensibly to the I/O problem. So if your database crashes a couple of times and there's some messages in the log, it's not Postgres that's kind of broken, it's the whole file system thing with Linux. So unfortunately, not trying to say bad things about Linux, just making a little joke of it there, but we have responded sensibly to what we've discovered, and you can be assured that the Postgres project treats your data as the most serious thing that we do. Okay, so we don't just stay up to keep our availability numbers high, we crash to make sure your data is not damaged. Another non-bug is that some of the other things that Timescale have said about Postgres performance, we've investigated, and I commissioned an independent analysis to see if we could understand where the negative performance was that was being claimed by Timescale DB, and we've got no evidence that there's any such performance problem with Postgres. So we've gone looking for it, we can't find it. That's on an objective test performed by Fabian Coelho. So, bugs and security issues. We've had lots of security issues. Some of them have been very significant, and I hope that you've responded to all of these security issues as and when they've arrived. So there have been some significant problems, but it's not hundreds, okay? It's a handful of problems. All of those problems we do respond to, so there's an active security group. The members of that group are not public, but I might or might not be on that group myself. But there is an active effort to maintain the security of the project when people report possible security incidents. So other project news, there's a new version of PG Bouncer 1.10 out, released 1st of July. It's got some security fixes. PG Bouncer is also scanned by Coverity, so again, quite a high security state that we maintain on the PG Bouncer project, and there's also a bug fixed in idle transaction timeout. PostgreSQL.His 3 will be out this year as well. There's been some substantial performance improvements by combining features in Postgres 12 with features in PostgreSQL.His, and as a result, there's a considerable improvement in the parallelization of PostgreSQL.His queries, and as a result, you'll see a lot better performance with PostgreSQL.His. So that is a new version due out in the next couple of months as well. Postgres continues to make efforts with standardization. We respect the SQL standard and we try hard to implement it. There's a number of new standard compliant commands in Postgres 12. One of the most interesting is generated always as, and that's pretty cool. It means you can avoid having a trigger now in order to generate additional column data. So that's quite an important feature. Hyperbolic functions, if you ever use that for spherical trigonometry. And also there's a new SQL JSON path language. So Andreas spoke a little bit about the importance of JSON. And what you'll see in Postgres 12 is a new language that will allow you to manipulate JSON, perform searches within it, and instead of just saying, does JSON contain this field, you can say, I want JSON to contain this field somewhere exactly in the structure of the JSON. So you can actually use JSON much more effectively in Postgres 12. We're also actively involved with SQL standards groups now. There's likely to be a new SQL standard in the next 2 years. We're not exactly sure which year it's going to be in, but there are some moves to introduce graph database commands into the SQL language, and we're actively, we as in Second Quadrant, are working with the SQL Standards group via Peter Eisentraut in Germany. amongst some of the other initiatives we're doing. Pluggable storage is a major new feature in Postgres 12, and something I didn't actually know, but Alvaro mentioned this to me yesterday, is that he received a small credit for the work on pluggable storage, but it is actually almost exactly the patch that he wrote as part of a project we worked on together called the Axle project, which wrote a number of different developments in 2015, and it's taken until now to get into core Postgres. So it's taken a while because it has required lots of different developers to agree on the way forwards. So that agreement took place a couple of years ago. So there was an announcement in early February 2018 that we had finally all agreed to go forwards with pluggable storage. And then in the last year, Andres Freund has spent a lot of time refining Alvaro's work and taking also work from Harry Babu Komi to integrate that now into Postgres. So that's why I've got Made in Chile on the ticket there, because I thought that you'd be happy and interested to know that that work came from somewhere near you at least. What does this mean? This means that what you think of as the storage format for Postgres is still going to be there, but now we're going to be able to add new storage formats into Postgres. Why would we want some new storage formats? Because things like column storage require a radical rethinking of the way that we store data. So there's a project called ZStore, which is specifically designed to store data in a column format. And then there's also another project called ZStore, which is designed to change the way the row store works, especially with regard to undo and vacuum and garbage collection. So there's a number of exciting new projects. You'll be happy to know, and Alvaro is especially happy to know, that there isn't a second Quadrant storage format or anything like that. What we intend to do is make sure that these two projects get into core and are fully valuable and useful. Okay, and so hopefully in the near future we will have not one storage format but 3 storage formats available, as well as the capability to add new storage formats in the future. So important new capabilities. It does mean, however, that certain other projects have been delayed as a result, and that's no problem because they'll happen one day. Foreign data wrappers have also got various changes coming. The main author, Tsuru Fujita, is now a committer, and we expect he will now be able to accelerate the work that he's been doing on foreign data wrappers, which might eventually, one day, mean we get some kind of sharding or scaling, but I'm not going to hold my breath too much on that. But there is progress forwards, that's the main thing. There's a number of different books out there. Dimitri has published one called The Art of Postgres, which he didn't give me a screen image for, but so unfortunately I've only got my book screen image, which we've brought a couple of copies with us to the conference. But the important thing there is that the Postgres books are being updated, and there's a lot of information sources about Postgres to allow adoption of the technology. So I mentioned a few things about recovery.conf changes. the parameters that you'll be able to change in Postgres 12 are the archive cleanup command, the promote trigger file, the recovery end command, and the recovery min apply delay. So unfortunately, one of the main objectives of the project has not yet occurred. We wanted to be able to change the point-in-time recovery options while the server was still running, but we can't yet do that. We will do it one day, we just haven't done it yet. But this is an important first step, and this has been, 5 years since we tried to get it in. So, Postgres adoption of some things can be slow, but it does eventually move forwards. That's the most important thing. We've made some important changes in the optimizer. There's now some changes to the way that the CTE inlining works. And if you don't know what CTEs are, it's the with clause. Okay, so if you write queries using a with clause, you can now control exactly how that optimization works. We've also got multi-column MCVs, meaning we can store the dependency between two columns. A typical example is that the area code for a telephone number is usually connected to the state or province. So when you look at somebody's address, you'll see that their telephone number does roughly match their actual postal address. That's how it operates in most countries. Now, the optimizer doesn't know that, so if you ask for all of the people that have a particular telephone area code and a particular state, the optimizer thinks those two things are completely independent and will assume that the number of rows returned by that query will be quite low, where in fact it is usually a very high dependency between those two columns, and so the row estimate is inaccurate. So what we're saying is Postgres 12 contains new and interesting ways to make sure that the optimizer gets the correct estimate for your queries. If it gets the correct estimate, it's much more likely to give you a good query plan. Okay, so this is particularly important in terms of executing fast queries. Now, the Postgres project has long taken the view that you shouldn't use hints, and this is what we're backing up here. We're saying that you don't use hints, don't hit it with a hammer, tell it the right information. Okay, and that's what this create statistics command gives you. In terms of performance, there's a number of changes. One of the fairly quiet things that you will have probably missed is the fact that performance on 8-core systems has gone up by more than twice, so more than 100% increase in performance because of some changes that we made to the way the index locking occurs, which was one of the bottlenecks on that kind of a system. So some great improvements there. And there's a whole load of other performance improvements, some of them quite subtle ones, like the speed of keyword lookup. I don't think I ever even dreamed that you could optimize that, but apparently you can, and now every single query is slightly faster as a result. It's not many percent faster, but it's measurably better. So every single SQL statement that hits the parser is now a few percentage points quicker. So brilliant work, guys, to the guys that thought of that. I wouldn't have done, but I'm glad somebody else did. There's been some really interesting changes to the way that B-tree indexes work. If you've got multi-column indexes, we now remove the leading column, so effectively compressing the size of the index. So that will mean that multi-column indexes are going to get noticeably smaller. Okay. Obviously, it depends exactly on which columns you choose for your index as to how that affects will take place. So you'll need to measure exactly how that works. Now you will have to rebuild your indexes to take advantage of that because it doesn't just happen automatically. Okay, you'll need to rebuild your index. But the good news is reindex concurrently exists. Okay, so now you can actually do that without screwing your system up. One of the other things that has occurred is that the B tree now stores pointers to rows in storage order. Now that matters not at all to you in daily life, but what it's going to do in the future is it's going to mean that vacuum performance will be considerably improved. So it's a very useful change for the future. There are many different index types in Postgres, and one of the interesting things that I saw a few years ago is one of the guys that worked for IBM was interviewed just as he was retiring, and they said, do you have any regrets about things that you didn't do in database research? And he said, oh, absolutely, definitely. I wish I'd spent more time on indexes. And, I guess we might say, well, actually, I prefer to go to the beach. But he wanted to spend more time on indexes, right? So, but interestingly, Postgres does have that work done on indexes. So Postgres has got more index types than any other database, okay? And that means that we've got the ability to index things that other databases only dream about, okay? So if you don't use GIN-GIST or SP-GIST indexes, try them out because there's some important capabilities there that you could be missing. And these things are not toys, they are production features that are quite widely used, but they're not widely used enough. So take note of that. We've made some very specific changes in Postgres 12 to further improve performance, so they're very worth using. So please use them. Got some interesting improvements in vacuum. We've got a whole load of new features allowing to control the way the vacuum works. I'm not even going to attempt to explain what some of these things do because it involves me having to explain to you exactly how vacuum works, and that will take an hour just on that. But the important thing there is that we've got some parameters that can alter the way that vacuum works when and if you need to vacuum your system. One of the most important changes is we changed the default vacuum cost delay down to 2 milliseconds, which is much more appropriate for use with SSDs, and it will increase the default rate at which vacuums your systems. So that's pretty cool. Interestingly enough, one of the other changes that's occurred is that we're able to specify the delay in terms of microseconds, not just milliseconds. So again, the world has moved forwards to the point where we need to start thinking in microseconds. VacuumDB also has some useful options. As I was saying the other day, rather strangely, the new options that they've added don't all exist in VacuumDB. So unfortunately, you have to use vacuum by hand in order to get it to work. You can't use all of those options with VacuumDB. But one of the things that is cool is that you can use VacuumDB to scan older tables that might need vacuuming using this new min XID, max XID. Now, unfortunately, that is, again, complex enough that I'm not going to tell you about it during this talk, okay? But it's some useful new options for vacuuming that have been added in Postgres 12. So Major new features for DBAs. I've already mentioned a few, re-index concurrently, but there's also some changes to alter table statements. I mentioned the set data type, but alter type, add value, has been made more practical. Previously, enums weren't easy to modify once you'd created them, and now if you use enum types, you'll be able to use those more effectively. So they're actually a very good way to optimize your referential integrity checks. So that's pretty cool. I noticed that one of the most important changes is, as I mentioned, that you can now specify times in microseconds, not just milliseconds. So, for example, things like commit delay can now be set in microseconds. So instead of having a commit delay of 10 milliseconds, as we had a few years ago, you can now set it to 500 microseconds. And there's some other cool things there as well. So Postgres 12 is due out in September, late September, early October, and it is fully supported immediately by some companies. Okay, I won't give a long list of the companies that do support it, but what I wanted to make sure that you understand is that the Postgres project does not release buggy software. So some people think, I won't use the first version because it's bound to have bugs. Well, all software has bugs, okay? So it's up to you to test it. So waiting does not help you. And let me explain why. Because if you report a problem with a feature, the Postgres 12 comes out end of September, beginning of October. But the window, the feature freeze for the next version closes at the beginning of February. So that gives you, if I get this right, 5 months from the day the software is released to the freeze of the next release. So if you want to not just report a bug, but report a kind of usage enhancement, you've got 5 months to report it, write it, and include it in the next release. So if you don't do that quick enough, then it's going to take us 2 years to fix your problem rather than 1. Okay? So what I'm saying to you is it's in your interest to go out and use the software as quickly as you can. If there are some problems, report them. It's in beta now. You can download it. You can use it. Don't wait for it to go production. Okay? Use it now. Test it, and then we'll be able to handle those bugs better. So it's up to you. If you don't report the bugs, they won't ever be fixed, right? And the only way to report bugs is to go looking for them, to actually test your applications on there. So tell people to adopt Postgres 12 as quickly as possible, because the guys have already spent 6 months polishing it and fixing bugs in it, okay? So that delay is already built into the way that we do things. So there's no need for further delay, okay? So please go and use it as soon as possible. Now, the good thing about that delay is it means that other projects are able to... Sorry, was that a question? No. Other projects are able to update themselves. So, for example, Barman 2.9 has recently been released with full support for Postgres 12. Okay, and other projects will be doing the same thing as well. So that gives us the ability to have a full ecosystem full of products that support each other correctly. So Postgres is a worldwide project, and when I travel around the world, the feeling that people have is that, we're just DBAs, we can't help the project. It's all those clever people in other countries that work on it. But this is not the case. You have contributors in Brazil, you have contributors in South America that are actively working on improving Postgres. Not just working on the translation, but that is a very important thing. But I'm talking about major feature developments, major changes to RDBA commands, and Yulia and Fabrizio have contributed things to Postgres, release after release after release. So these people are contributing. I haven't actually met Yulia yet, but that was one of the things I wanted to do when I was here. So if you're here, I don't know. But, so the message I wanted to get across to you is that you can contribute, okay? Don't wait for somebody else to contribute. If you're a DBA or whatever role you have in the organization, your opinion matters. You can make a difference, okay? Some of the features that people have developed, they won't necessarily tell you. Some of them were quite easy, and you don't need to be a great C developer to get stuck in and make a difference, okay? Obviously, some of them are very hard, and it's difficult to know the difference. But you personally can make a difference to the development of Postgres. You can suggest new features, you can report bugs, you can report performance issues, just ask questions. Or if you can't do any of those things, tell people what you're using Postgres for, because that's always useful information to find out exactly how people are using Postgres, how they're trying to use Postgres, okay? So Postgres is a worldwide project. Postgres is not particularly big in London, in the UK. If we have a Postgres London meetup, it's not much bigger than this, okay? So don't think that Postgres is happening somewhere else. It's happening here, okay? That's the most important thing to understand. It's happening here all over the world, okay? In Japan, all over South America, in the US, and everywhere. So you can contribute, so please get involved. All of us that were involved all got involved in a small way to begin with, always, okay? Somebody asked a question on a mailing list and then asked another question on a mailing list and then got involved that way. So don't imagine that Alvaro or I kind of were born with incredible C coding talents and, we just sort of like do it in our sleep with one hand. It doesn't work that way. It requires hard work. And, it's taken some years to get into the project in a way that you can make very major contributions. But you have to start somewhere, and so you can become involved. So that's really the message that I wanted to leave you with, is that your contribution can make a major difference to the future of Postgres, okay? There's a credit list of who's done what in Postgres, and I went through that list to see which people were on it that were known by me to be from Brazil. I might have missed a few people, but your name could be on that in the future, okay? So, take the opportunity and get involved, please. Just a last point. If you'd like to work with Second Quadrant in the future, then we are hiring. We'd be very interested to talk to you. So I'm here for a couple of days. If you'd like to talk to me or you'd like to talk to any of my colleagues, we'd be very interested to do so. Did you get permission to say a few words as well?
Sure.
Okay, so if I can just hand over to my colleague Raphael to talk a little bit about what working at Second Quadrant is like.
Bom dia, pessoal. Eu sou o Rafael, o Simon já me anunciou, né? Eu trabalho para a SQL Quadrant fazem 2 anos, aproximadamente. Como o Simon falou, a SQL Quadrant está sempre em busca de novos talentos, né? Como ele falou, não é só DBA que nós estamos procurando, sysadmin, pessoas de marketing, enfim. A SQL Quadrant está com interesse em crescer aqui, não só na América do Sul, principalmente no Brasil, né? Eu e o William, que é meu colega brasileiro também, nós trabalhamos em Curitiba e a ideia é expandir o quadro de funcionários aqui no Brasil. Então, a Second Quadrant, como eu falei, ele está em busca de novos talentos. Quando eu e o William entramos na empresa, nós não tínhamos muita experiência. Então, isso é uma prova viva de que a empresa está disposta a investir, né, no quadro de pessoal e treinar. Postgres, as mais diversas áreas, sysadmin, enfim, como eu falei. Então, quem tiver interesse, está ali nos slides, né, o nosso site. A Second Quadrant ela existe faz muito tempo. Como o Simon falou, nós temos diversos Postgres committers na empresa. Eu acho que o número hoje é 5, se não me engano. Então são pessoas, o Álvaro, um deles, são pessoas que trabalham no community Postgres, né, desenvolvem features da própria ferramenta. Então utilizam o tempo que eles têm na empresa para desenvolver novas features e aprimorar o próprio Postgres. Então essa é a mensagem que eu queria deixar para vocês aqui. Quem tiver interesse, eu e o William vamos estar por aí pelo evento. Nós temos um stand lá embaixo, no saguão principal ali, né? Podemos conversar, trocar ideias, trocar cartão, é sempre importante. Tiverem dúvidas de como funciona o trabalho no Second Quadrant, eu não falei, Second Quadrant é uma empresa remota, né? Então nós trabalhamos de casa. Então eu e o William somos os representantes do Brasil. Não temos um escritório no Brasil, assim como tem pessoas espalhadas pelo mundo inteiro, né? Temos funcionários no Chile, na Argentina, nos Estados Unidos, Austrália, Japão, enfim, Europa. Então, o nosso esquema de trabalho é remoto. Então, todo dia nós estamos online, nós temos o nosso mecanismo de chat, a gente conversa entre si lá, e todo o trabalho é feito online. Então, quem tiver interesse em trabalhar assim, vamos ter contato, vamos conversar hoje ou amanhã, vamos estar pelo evento aí. Beleza? Obrigado, gente.